In 2019, I started college. I moved into the dorm, signed up for my classes, and discovered my roommate's old PlayStation 2. I never had one as a kid, we were more of a GameCube house. On multiple recommendations, I took the opportunity to boot up a copy of Persona 4 that I bought online for $12. The Persona games clock in at around 100 hours, and that's a lot of time, even without a full course load. Between summer classes, clubs, and eventually my own thesis research, I remember that I didn't finish the game until my second year, sitting in the big beige grandpa chair in the living room of my first apartment, sometime after everyone else had gone to bed. Even then, I think I had the sense that the game was uniquely important to me. I didn't get to play games much for a long while after that. The following year I started grad school. I wasn't particularly happy. I had realized that summer that I didn't really want to pursue the career I had invested so much time preparing myself for, and I strongly reconsidered not even coming back to campus. I did, though. I was worried about disappointing my family, and honestly, I was worried about disappointing myself. My whole generation was raised to believe that everything would be okay so long as you went and got a degree. Any degree. And if you didn't, then what chance did you have? I believed it. I figured things would be alright if I just finished school, so that's the goal I raced for. My first semester, I took a double course load. I didn't give myself time to think about anything but schoolwork. Depression isn't a thing that goes away if you just ignore it. I realized later the signs I had manifested since I was a teenager, but the stigma of mental health issues was deeply ingrained in me. I figured I was just weak, just needed to toughen up. I have to think I realized something wasn't right after the longest and most intense relationship of my young adult life fell apart. I started running. Not metaphorically, I actually went out and ran 3, 4, 5 miles every day after classes for 53 days straight. I know because I marked every single one on my calendar. I had taken psychology courses, I had done my own reading, I knew the link between exercise and mood, and I was terrified what would happen if I had the time to mourn that relationship. It was a lot like substance abuse, really. I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I didn't do drugs, but I found something that would keep me from facing my real problems. A cocktail of runner's high and constant exhaustion. The day it finally came crashing down, I sobbed on the floor of my room for 2 hours straight. The only time I got up was to turn off the light because I couldn't stand to see myself in the reflection from the bathroom mirror. In fact, I kept the lights out in my room for 2 days. I looked down when I had to go into the bathroom because the idea of seeing my own face was so repulsive to me. Even when I started looking again, it felt like I didn't know who I was. The self-disgust had passed, and in its place there was just a hollow feeling, an estrangement. That was what it took for me to know that I needed help. I made an appointment with the school's counseling center and started going every week. There was a lot of work involved. I had to own up to a bunch of backward ideas about work ethic, happiness, and learn strategies for dealing with my own deeply ingrained self-loathing. But once I had done that heavy lifting, learned to carry the weight of depression a bit more comfortably, I still had this sense of not recognizing myself. I explained to the counselor that I felt like I had multiple conflicting identities. In a tough situation, I would ask myself what kind of person I wanted to be, and I came up with conflicting answers. My sense of identity just felt broken. That's when the counselor brought up internal family systems. The idea, as he explained it, was to identify the different aspects of yourself and name them. What do they want? When are certain identities more dominant? Are they out of balance? Are some harmful? As soon as he started describing it, the idea clicked. I hadn't come across this particular approach in my own reading, but it felt familiar. Of course it did. It's Persona. The Persona games love archetypes. The games use a shared catalog of ghosts, gods, spirits, beasts common to the Shin Megami Tensei titles. The creatures are pulled from myths and folktales all over the world, but the Persona games define their own reasons for the existence of these creatures. They're us. The world of Persona is influenced heavily by Jungian psychology. Whereas Freud raised the idea of a personal unconscious, the contents of which might vary a lot from one person to another, Carl Jung believed that we also have a collective unconscious, and that universal aspect explains why every culture gives rise to similar archetypes, a sky god, a trickster, a wise elder, and so on. In Persona, the main characters cross over into a literal, shared unconscious world. The beasts they encounter there are the manifestations of the same human archetypes that recur in our folklore time and time again. Thor and Ares, the angry warrior gods, Hercules and Beowulf, the heroes of unnatural strength and courage, Loki and Prometheus, the mischievous thieves. Jung understood these creatures not just as characters, but as aspects of the human psyche, which is why we've been so obsessed with them for millennia. They hold up a mirror to ourselves. I went home that night to try and define my own archetypes, my personae. There was the child, the part that just wants to be comforted and cared for, the part that still believes in simple, unironic joys and unconditional love, but is easily hurt and overwhelmed. The part that takes the reins in fits of depression, that just can't handle how harsh the world is. There was the punk, the part that revels in risky behavior and impulsive decisions, the part that wants to smoke and drink and stay out all night and doesn't care about the consequences, the part that resents authority, the one that wants to start fights on principle and never compromise. And there was the scholar, this creature that yearns to know and understand everything and consider every possible angle before making any choice, to cultivate some sort of ascetic discipline, to live on an intellectual plane above chaotic reality. The idea that I just needed to pick one of these selves disappeared pretty quickly. Obviously, none of my personae were really healthy on their own. But that was never the point of the Persona games. While the other characters in the game only had one persona, one archetype, the protagonist of those games was special. They alone had the ability to hold multiple personae at once and to switch between them at will. In the game's own terms, they could choose the mask they present to the world based on the situation. At the time, that was my breakthrough. I didn't feel like I was being inconsistent anymore. I wasn't having a crisis of identity. I was free to choose the right approach for the right situation. I could be the punk or the scholar when it suited me, and I could keep the child in check. And for a while that was fine. But like I said, none of those personae is healthy. None is a complete approach. There's another element of the Persona games I've left out until now. Having some decent personae to swap between is pretty good, but how do you get the strongest ones? You combine them. The child, the punk, the scholar, they aren't totally separate. They overlap. The child and the punk both want sensation, affection, approval. The punk and the scholar are both principled. They both value new experiences. And the scholar and the child both share a wonder and a curiosity about the world. They also cover one another's weaknesses. The punk has a thick skin and the scholar a worldliness that compensate for the child's fear. The joy of the child and the curiosity of the scholar balance the punk's cynicism. The passions of the child and the punk ground the scholar in material reality. The punk's impetuousness and the scholar's calculations balance one another out, and their dedication to principle powers their actions. And the pure trust and affection of a child is essential to taking any compassionate action in the world. The persona I made of the other three took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort, failed attempts, and tries again before I could understand it as a new face, a more whole face with which to approach the world. The persona I made, I call the compassionate warrior. It's the warrior that fights with his heart bared. The compassionate warrior loves everyone, friends and strangers alike, and endeavors to hear their stories, to understand, and to make their fights his own. It's staunch in defense of what's right and judicious in its approach, however indignant at the injustice it sees. The compassionate warrior is the empathy, love, and trust of the child, the clear head and the will to understand of the scholar, and the impassioned strength of the punk, but it's something more than each of them. It's the transformation of weakness into vulnerability. All along, I thought that I needed to overcome and be rid of the child, the part of myself that was soft and frightened. But that same aspect is the well from which comes all the empathy and love that are necessary for changing the world for the better. The world is frightening, it is overwhelming, but if we shield ourselves from fear and pain, we also cease to feel the fear and pain of others, and we can easily lose our will to make things better for all. Vulnerability can be painful, but it's vital to our very humanity, and it is essential to our movement. Thank you so much for listening. The Neighborhood with Mike and Dave is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you to Justin for supporting us on Patreon. To become a supporter of this channel, go to patreon.com/neighborhood_MD. For more updates and content, follow The Neighborhood on Twitter and watch our stream on Twitch. We'll see you next time.